This is Garis, Masculist, MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 246, entitled Masculisting the Feminazis. Description. This flyer lists why masculists have such a hatred of feminazis and how the feminazis can be stopped. 4 such reasons are given. 1. Feminazi amorality in the divorce courts. 2. Fluffy feminist hypocrisy. 3. Child-minded femaliens. 4. The sex war. The flyer itself. Masculisting the Feminazis by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. This flyer is another in a series with the title Masculisting the ... This one is concerned with reasons why the masculists have such a hatred of the feminazis and what the masculists can do to force women to drop their feminazi attitudes, that is, how to punish them. Here's a list of the major reasons why masculists have a hatred of feminazis. Feminazi amorality in the divorce courts. Fluffy feminist hypocrisy. Child-minded femaliens. And the sex war. Feminazi amorality in the divorce courts. The primary reason why masculists have such a hatred of feminazis is because of what they have done to men in the divorce courts. These hated feminazis are destroying the lives of one married father in 4, financially massacring him, destroying him, and with an amoral callousness that makes men despise these feminazi bitches, who are the first category of women that the masculists and MGTOWs reject, wanting nothing to do with them, not even pumping and dumping them. Women evolved to be sexploiters of men. Masculists know that. Evolution, that is nature, can find solutions to its problems without them being moral or ethical. Evolution moulded the human female to sexploit men, to have a hypergamous attitude towards men, so that if a woman got a realistic opportunity to dump her current manslave and trade up for a better one, that is, a man who could give her more resources, that is, in the distant past, more meat, or today, more money, then she would do it because it was favourable to her. It increased her Darwinian fitness, that is, it made her more likely to survive, which ultimately is what biology is all about. This amoral callousness that evolved in women in the distant past carries over in today's divorce courts, where a woman will gladly extract resources from a man so that she can continue to exploit him after the divorce the way she did before the divorce. A fluffy divorcing woman will take custody of the kids with a 90% probability. She will take her ex-husband's house, half his possessions, take child payments and often alimony, so that she can continue to be a parasite of him. She will have no guilt feelings about such a rotten deal for the man, because she has the attitude that men exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. She will feel it is her right. This attitude is deeply ingrained in women's psyches. Masculists know that women are like this, that is, amoral, who can so coldly, so callously, so blatantly abuse men in the divorce courts that it deeply alienates men from women. When men are so painfully woken up to the truth of women's very negative, parasitic, amoral nature. I have not been divorce raped, as above, but I have been robbed of half my savings by a fluffy parasite. My third wife, my first Chinese wife, stole half my savings, that I could not get back from the Chinese courts. She did all the admin for me because I could not read the Chinese characters. After a few years into the marriage, she suggested I invest my savings into schemes that would give a higher return. I agreed and signed the forms at the bank, never suspecting that she had transferred that money into accounts in her own name. I was so used to just blindly signing that the thought just did not occur to me that she could do such a thing. When the marriage went sour, that is, I began to see her more clearly as just a middle-browed, intellectually lazy Chinese woman who lied to me about her desire to get a PhD. Her idea of reading material was the Chinese equivalent of the Reader's Digest, a very middle-brow publication. I suspect the whole relationship on her part was fake, that she was simply happy to live off my full professor's salary with its prestige and get to go on overseas trips with me to New York, Melbourne, etc. When the relationship soured and we separated, I began looking into my finances and discovered that she had put my savings into her own name, so I could not take out the money because, from the bank's point of view, it was her money, so I asked for it back. She refused, so I got a lawyer to divorce me from her and to get my money back. I got the divorce, but not the money, because the Chinese divorce court system favours its own nationals. What truly angered me about her was her attitude, her fluffy parasite attitude, that she felt she had the right as a divorced woman to steal my money, and a lot of money, half my savings, that then made me rather poor for the rest of my life. I hated her for that. I hated her female nature, her evolved, femalien, parasitic nature, that she felt she could exploit a male so callously, so amorally. I hated her for that, and I hate women for that. It motivates me as a masculist to punish women for being fluffies. I want to kill them off, not by murdering them, but letting them die a slow death, by being ignored totally by men, forced to rot on the shelf, rejected utterly by men for being amoral, parasitic, hated fluffies. It's an attitude like that that is causing men to hate women, to ignore them. When the sex bots and artworms come, women are going to be ignored by men. Men will not be forced to accept women's monopoly of vagina and womb. In a decade or less, the sex bots and artworms will be here, and women will go into deep existential crisis and depression as men desert them in droves. The fact that women evolved to be parasites on men, to have such amoral, callous attitudes towards men, that it is in women's nature to be like that, only makes women all the more detestable to men. If a man is convinced that he cannot change a woman's inherent, evolved tendency to want to parasite off him, with no conscience or sense of dishonour in doing so, then that only makes men all the more contemptuous of women, deeply alienating men from women. It's not for nothing that I label women femaliens. Women have alien natures from men's point of view. Women are a different species. They have 10% smaller brains for a start. They see men as sexploitable, as man-slaves, to be manipulated so that they can have resources extracted from them to pay for women and their babies. Nature too has conspired against men to make it easier for women to sexploit men. When a man sees his regular female sexual partner, the frontal lobes of his brain switch off. The frontal lobes are responsible for long-term planning and critical thinking. So all a woman needs to do to be able to extract resources from a man is to fuck him regularly long enough so that his frontal lobes switch off, making him putty for her, so that she can mould him the way she wants. What she wants are his resources for her and her babies. Knowing this about women leaves a really bitter taste in the mouths of men, of MGTOWs and Masculists. It's one of the core reasons why the Masculists place such heavy emphasis on the fipping of women, forcing them to become FIPs, financially independent persons, so that they cannot continue to be parasites on men the way they have been for several million years. Masculists have the power now to force women to FIP up or be punished by not getting one. Masculists can force women to behave in ways that run counter to women's evolved amoral, parasitic nature, and there's nothing women can do about it. Men have the power to force women to fip up, because a woman can only be a fluffie, a traditional woman who expects to be able to parasite off the money of a man, if she can get her financial claws into some gullible manslave. But the supply of such manslaves is drying up, thanks to the spread of masculist and MGTOW ideas, causing men to wake up to the awful parasitic attitude of fluffies, forcing fluffies to grow up, to pretend as though women have moral values and not expect to be able to parasite off a man. Fluffy feminist hypocrisy. Another major reason why masculists despise feminazis is their hypocrisy. Masculists label feminists fluffy feminist hypocrites, because most feminists are hypocritical when it comes to accepting equal obligations with men, particularly concerning sharing the burden of earning the living, by bothering to get a career-competent education, so that women can be FIPs as adults and not be motivated to parasite off the money of a man. Feminazis are hypocrites because they want equal rights with men, but reject equal obligations with men. They want their cake and to eat it too. The most blatant example of fluffy feminist hypocrisy is in the divorce courts, where feminists are all for equal rights in the parliaments, but are fluffies in the divorce courts. That is, they want equal rights for women as voted by the gender politicians, but expect to remain fluffy parasites in the divorce courts, expecting men to continue to pay for them after the divorce as they did before the divorce. This hypocrisy of the fluffy feminists is another major reason why masculists piss on feminazis. No one likes hypocrites. Child-minded femaliens. Masculists are really tired of feminazis constantly dumping on men as the cause of women's problems. Sure, some of women's problems are caused by men, but certainly not all of them. But that's not what the feminazis think. Feminazis put the blame for women's inferior status in society on men, seeing men as evil discriminators who prevent women from achieving equal status with men, blocking women from advancing in their careers, etc. Children are not the only creatures who will blame anyone but themselves for their problems. Women are also like this. The MGTOWs have a rather wise saying that, quote, "Feminism is female nature politicized," end quote. I think there's a lot of truth to that statement. Now that women have the contraceptive pill invented by men, household gadgets invented by men, and higher education invented by men, women can be FIPs now, so are not constrained by men to be nice to men, because men had the financial power to destroy a woman's life by throwing her out if she became obnoxious. With the rise of second-wave feminism in the 70s, the feminists took over the divorce courts and made them strongly biased in women's favour, strongly reinforcing fluffy attitudes in the divorce laws, making them so toxic for men. Once women knew that they could financially massacre men in the divorce courts, the brakes were off in suppressing their true nature, and out came the hypergamy, the bitchiness, the amoral parasitism of women, and the child-mindedness. Feminazis put the blame for women's situation on men. What they do not do is take some of the responsibility for their own situation on themselves. For example, it does not occur to them that they earn less money per person than men do because of female choices, rather than the feminazi explanation that the wage gap is due to male prejudice against women. The wage gap is due largely to women's choices and values. Women are less ambitious than men, work fewer hours, bother less to get career-competent qualifications, and take years off work to raise small children. There's a neurosis on the part of many feminazis, especially the rather fat, unattractive feminists, the fat fours, who blame men for not having a man instead of themselves. If these fat fours bothered to make themselves less fat, they would increase their chances of getting a man. These women often lock themselves into a vicious circle that they're not intelligent enough to pull themselves out of. They don't control the number of calories they stuff into their fat faces, get fat, repel men sexually due to their excess flesh, then blame men for being manless instead of themselves and their lack of dietary discipline. They then blame men in their social interactions, causing men to reject them all the more, thus tightening a vicious circle. It's the inability of feminazis to take responsibility for their own lives, putting the blame for women's situation on men, is seen as childish by men. If the feminazis continue to behave like children, then it's not surprising that men will continue to see women as children, that is, not as responsible adults who take control of their own lives, who behave as responsible, financially independent adults, as FIPs. Then men will continue to not take women seriously, especially child-minded feminazis, and hence not respect them. Men certainly don't respect feminazis who constantly put men down for women's problems. Masculists see the feminazis' inability to face up to the realities of female causes of women's problems as contemptuous. Women are less objective when it comes to accepting female inferiority in general achievement levels. Women have always been outperformed by men across the board. Feminazis lash out at the so-called glass ceiling. That is, the real difficulty women have in reaching the top levels of management in companies, etc. They blame male prejudice for this, rather than putting some or most of the blame on themselves, that is, women's inferior abilities compared to men at the top end of the performance scale. Masculists need to really ram home the idea of female intellectual and motivational inferiority compared to men. For example, men are smarter than women by 4 IQ points on average. Men have a 10% higher IQ variance than women, so the morons and the genii are males, so the top flyers are men. Men win 99% of the science Nobel Prizes. Men have much higher testosterone levels than women, so are more aggressive, more ambitious, more dogged, more persistent, so achieve far more than women, who are more wishy-washy and give up more easily. Women have 10% smaller brains than men, so have a 10% smaller neural processing capacity than men. So it's not surprising that women have invented almost nothing, created almost nothing, built almost nothing. Women have always been parasites of men. Men create the culture and women benefit from it. Women evolved to be baby factories and childminders. That is what they evolved to do, and that is what they are happiest at doing, experience shows. That is, when they are occupied by a bunch of their own kids. Those careerist women who are childless are miserable, modern experience shows. The masculists have the power to force women to grow up by forcing them to become FIPs, or they rot on the shelf, being rejected by men. Masculists expect women to be emo FIPs, that is, equal moral obligation FIPs. That is, expecting as a moral duty to be FIPs and not parasiting on men. However, since women evolved to be amoral when it comes to extracting resources from a man, this expectation by masculists on women to feel a moral duty to FIP up will probably only be an on-the-surface, learned behaviour on the part of women. Fipping up and acting like a responsible adult will not come naturally to women, but they will be forced to behave that way because they do not have a choice. The masculists will force them to, or women don't eat. They will be poor and spat at for being fluffy parasites, that is, immoral, parasitic, manslaving vermin, to be wiped out. The sex war. There's a sex war going on between the masculists and the feminazis. In many situations, there are zero-sum games between men and women. That is, situations where one person's gain is the other person's loss, so that the net gain over the two people is zero. That is, for example, the higher the wage of an employee, the less profit for the employer. One glaring example of this is the lack of a paternity rejection right that the feminazis fight tooth and nail. The lack of the para is probably the most blatant example of sexual discrimination against men that exists. A para would allow a man to reject an unwanted pregnancy. He could fill in a government paternity rejection form, so that if the woman goes ahead with the pregnancy, then she's fully financially responsible for the kid. Women have a MARA, maternity rejection right, that is, the right to reject an unwanted pregnancy, aka abortion right, but men don't have an equivalent right. The reason why fluffy feminist hypocrites fight the legislation of the para with such ferocity is that if it came in, women would be forced to grow up, to become responsible FIPs, and to take control of their own lives, not blaming men for everything, being forced to behave as responsible adults the way men do. But feminazi hypocrites don't want this. They want to stay in their childish dependency state, relying on men to pay for them, so that they have made the gender politicians reject the idea of a para, so that millions of men have their lives ruined by the criminal behaviour of women who lie to their boyfriends/husbands about taking the pill, get pregnant, then expect the man to pay for the baby. Millions of men are duped and abused by feminazi bitches this way. Women are amoral when it comes to babies and getting babies paid for. Women don't care that they are ruining men's lives by being so criminal as to trick a man into pregnancy. Masculists have a particular hatred for such women who do this and want it to be made a crime. Men need to be given the para so that women cannot do this, but a para would scare the fluffies shitless because it would mean that they would be forced to give up their fluffy status, being dependent on men for their money, so that they would not be able to sit on their fat parasitic asses at home raising her kids that the husband pays for. The para would destroy that lifestyle for women, so they are terrified of it and fight it with everything they have. The idea of a para puts real existential angst into fluffies' hearts, filling them with terror. If the para comes in, fluffies will have to grow up, become adults, become responsible, stop being dependent children, and FIP up. Masculists have the financial power to force women to FIP up, so fluffies are doomed. Masculists and MGTOWs refuse to have relationships with fluffies who are seen to be manslaving parasites to be spat at, as immoral, inferior creatures unworthy of getting a man. Such women are punished, and deservedly so, because they expect men to be their manslaves, working for women, so women can have babies while they sit on their fat asses at home, living off their man's money. Not anymore. The Masculists and MGTOWs are killing off the fluffies. Fluffies are a dying breed, thank God, thanks to Masculists and MGTOW moral pressure on women to FIP up or be punished by men by not getting one. Probably the two biggest examples of the sex war is what is happening now in the divorce courts and the lack of a para. But there are many other examples of legal and social discrimination against men that the MRM, men's rights movement in the US, focuses on. For example, heavier punishment for men than women for equal crimes, earlier retirement ages for women, conscription for men but not for women in many countries, men's lower life expectancy due to men's greater stress load as the traditional breadwinner, a 4 times higher suicide rate amongst men than women, because men are socialized not to seek help the way women are, etc. There's a long list of such examples where women benefit at men's expense. That is, women are parasitic on men in more than financial terms. The feminazis have gone overboard. They have moved from second wave to third wave, that is, from pushing for equal rights for women to now pushing for genocracy, that is, rule of women over men at men's expense. Fortunately for men, we men have the financial power to force women to FIP up, so the ultimate power rests with us. When men become collectively angry, God help women. That is happening now as masculinist rage is spreading across the world via the internet, waking men up to female amorality, to female parasitic nature, causing men to reject women in greater numbers, forcing women to FIP up, to become nicer to men, or they'll be punished by not getting a man. The sex war is heating up. Feminazis are so hated by men now that young women are afraid to state publicly in their circle of friends that they are feminists through fear of not getting a man, because no man wants a relationship with a misandrist, man-dumping feminazi bitch. Women like that rot on the shelf, manless, loveless, sexless, babyless, poor and spat at. The masculists have a lot to do because we don't yet live in a FIP society where girls are socialised by parents and educated by teachers to be FIPs, so that the gender laws can be men-fared, the divorce laws men-fared, the para brought in, and the many legal and social discriminations men-fared across the board. Creating a FIP society is the great goal of the masculists, but it won't come into being until men win the sex war and the feminazis give up their dream of creating a ginocracy. Feminazis will probably die out as both sexes increasingly hate them. Men hate them because of what they're doing to men in the divorce courts, etc. Women hate them increasingly because women can't get sperm from quality men due to the MGTOW boycott of marriage and paternity, due to the toxicity of the divorce courts created by the feminazi fluffy feminist hypocrites, causing 2/3 of young men in many Western countries to refuse to marry, refuse to have kids, and to spend their money on themselves, thus causing millions of women to be babyless. With both sexes hating the feminazis, they will die out. Women will give up being feminazis when they are rejected from all sides. They will just fade away and learn to be nice again to men, or they'll die out. Men have the financial power to force women to FIP up, or they don't eat. That's the comforting thought that masculists can use to encourage themselves in winning the sex war. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. YouTube channels De Garis, Masculist, MGTOW, Flyers, and De Garis Essays. Ciao.